New concerns being raised about another of Donald Trump's choices now. A group of nearly 100 former national security officials sounding the alarm over President-elect Trump's decision to tap former Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard for Director of National Intelligence. In a letter addressed to Senate leadership, the officials write they are alarmed to hear of Gabbard's nomination because of her history of, quote, sympathy for dictators like Vladimir Putin and Bashar al-Assad of Syria. The national security officials also note Gabbard would be the least experienced Director of National Intelligence since the position was created in 2004. The group urges the Senate to carefully evaluate Gabbard through closed-door hearings that would give lawmakers the opportunity to review government files on the DNI pick. So we seem to be going here, Katty K, down the line. It started with Matt Gaetz. He got his moment of attention, and he had to step back. For now, it's Pete Hegseth at defense. But many, many, not just these 100 former and current national security officials, but many, many people who've worked in intelligence, who've worked in national security, have expressed their objections, to put it mildly, to Tulsi Gabbard, given her past sympathies for Putin, for Assad and other dictators, that she would be holding all of America's secrets.
Yeah, the conservative kind of defense of Tulsi Gabbard seems to be that the intelligence community needs a shakeup. Just look at the Iraq war, where their intelligence was faulty or managed to push a political situation that got America into that disastrous war. And so some conservatives that I've spoken to have said, well, she is somebody that believes that. She's very skeptical about the intelligence community, and it's time that they got a real kind of hauling over. But more predominantly, even from Republicans, the view that I'm hearing is the problem with Tulsi Gabbard is not just that she doesn't have the experience, she's not qualified in the way that Pete Hegseth has never run a department like this, Bobby Kennedy has never run a department the size of the department that he would be looking at. It's also that she's not known famously for keeping secrets. I mean, I've had a former CIA person say to me that one of the things she's famous for is that she doesn't keep secrets terribly well. And the concern is, what would the knock-on effect be with allies because of that? Signal intelligence, I understand, is very tied up between America and its allies. But human intelligence is something that can be sort of decoupled, if you like. And one of the concerns that I've heard is that if Tulsi Gabbard is the person who's at the head of America's intelligence community, then that could happen, that something human intelligence could just not come through to America in the way that it has done.
So, Gene, we know the point of many of these picks is to be anti-establishment, anti-elite, anti-deep state, to use a term favored by Donald Trump and his supporters. But there are people who are not establishment, who are not elite, who don't also sympathize with Vladimir Putin and Bashar al-Assad.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And look, I could certainly make the argument that, yes, the intelligence community could use some scrutiny and maybe some shaking up. And they have been wrong about a number of things, important things over the years. And so, you know, why is that? But there is absolutely no indication that Tulsi Gabbard is capable of making that sort of transition, to say nothing of the other questions about her and, frankly, about her loyalties, about the way she has publicly been more supportive of Putin and of Assad than others, or than almost anybody else in her position. It's these nominees simply are not qualified to do the jobs that they're being nominated to do, and that has to be, if not the number one consideration, I think, for these senators. It's certainly up there. You talk about the allegations about Pete Hegseth, but what makes you think he can run a bureaucracy and fighting machine as big as the Defense Department? There's nothing in his past that makes me think he's capable of doing that. And to compare, you know, to say, well, Joni Ernst voted for Lloyd Austin, so she's got to vote for him. Well, Lloyd Austin was, you know, a veteran leader in the armed forces who did have the experience, who knew the Pentagon, who knew how to get things done. Hegseth is not bad, and again, Tulsi Gabbard is not bad in terms of intelligence. So, are the senators really going to approve people who are not qualified and probably not capable of serving the country the way it needs to be served in these very, very big jobs? And I think that's the main question.
It's a great point. In a lot of the cases of some of these choices, the questions over character have overshadowed all the questions about qualifications for the actual job. So, Jackie Alemany, there's new reporting from the Bulwark this morning that says Donald Trump is going to go to the mat for both Tulsi Gabbard and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. because he believes they represent everything he represents, a challenge to the status quo, taking down the bureaucracy, shaking up Washington. With all the focus right now on Pete Hegseth, what's your sense of the appetite in Congress for a Tulsi Gabbard, for a Bobby Kennedy?
So this has been the one benefit of having other candidates that are more overtly controversial. It's been a little bit of a deflection tactic from some of the other candidates and nominees who also have controversies that haven't yet spilled out into public view yet. But what you're saying exactly is why Trump aides are telling us behind the scenes that backing Hegseth and continuing to stand behind him is so important to show and to not allow this narrative to set in that the GOP-led Senate has essentially neutered Trump's power and his mandate here to appoint people into his positions, people who are loyalists, who are actually going to carry out his campaign promises and his MAGA mandate. So far, there hasn't been much talk of Gabbard. People have been pretty preoccupied on Capitol Hill, but this is exactly where FBI checks continue to come into the conversation. There is a desire for the full spectrum of information possible. And I think that this is where they're going to get a lot of that on Gabbard in particular. But, it'll be interesting to see what kind of position and posture Trump takes with people like RFK and Gabbard. So far, with Matt Gaetz and even with Pete Hegseth, Trump has sat back a little bit and let them try to front a defense. He did make some calls for Matt Gaetz prior to Gaetz withdrawing from the nomination, but we have been told that he hasn't been making calls on behalf of Hegseth and has largely left it up to him and his team to fend for himself and put up as robust of a defense as possible. But, we will see as this process plays out. We know that the transition team has now that these people have been picked and put into place are focusing on murder boards and prep and combating some of these narratives in the media.
It's still early in the process. It's worth reminding people we still have FBI background checks and, of course, the hearings themselves, assuming some of these choices make it all the way to the hearings. Still ahead.